apologies for absence. Mr. White, do you have any?
We have no apologies for this meeting. Thank you, Chair.
Great, thank you. Members are reminded of their responsibility to declare any disclosable pecuniary interest not entered in the authority's register or local non-pecuniary interest in which they have in any item of business on the agenda, and to leave the meeting prior to discussion and voting on an item which they have a disposable pecuniary interest. Does anyone wish to declare any interest in any items on the agenda this afternoon?
Chair, Councillor Pearce has his hand up.
Councillor Pearce.
Thank you, Chairman. Item 9, community housing. I wish to declare a personal interest in the Brentor housing scheme as being a member of the Parish Council at Brentor and also its chairman. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Pearce. That's noted. Item 3 on the agenda, items requiring urgent attention. I know of none. Mr. White, is that correct?
That's correct. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. White. So if we could move to item 4, confirmation of the previous minutes. These have been circulated and they appear on your agenda papers. If we can go through the pages for accuracy and we'll then make sure they're a clear representation of a clear reflection of the meeting. So anything on page 1, councillors? Page 2? Page 3? Page 4? And page 5. Can I accept those minutes as a confirmation of the meeting and sign those in due course? I think that's fine, Mr. White, if you could note that accordingly.
Thank you, Chair, will do.
So if we can move on to the next item, item 5, there is a public question. The public question is as shown on the screen in front of you, and the question that has been put to us is, will the toilets at the car park at Brentor be open from Easter for the season? I can answer this, and I'll invite comments from anybody else who might like to add, but the answer is that it is planned that the toilets will be open from the 1st of April in accordance with the normal regime. The parish council, I believe, met last night and has agreed to work with West Devon in getting the toilets open at that time, subject to confirmation of a contribution that is due and expected from the church wardens of Brentor Church. Does anybody wish to add anything to that? That's the position as I understand it. So if that could be recorded and a response sent accordingly, Mr. White.
Thank you, Chair, will do.
And we're going to move on to the next item, which is a reinstatement of an item that's previously been a feature of Hub committee agendas, and that is an update from a lead member. Lead members will take it in turn to give an update on their particular areas. I'm actually going to give an update myself today on the...
Apologies, we do. We've got the Hub forward plan at item 6.
Oh,
apologies.
I do apologise. I'm looking at your screen rather than the minutes. I will rewind. Members, the Hub Committee forward plan, which was circulated with your agenda papers, could members please review the plan and let us know if there is anything on there that our attention needs to be drawn to or needs to be changed or amended. Are there any comments or additions, members? I've not got anything coming forward, Mr. White, so I think we can take that as noted.
Thank you, Chair.
And I'll move on now to the lead Hub Committee member update, which I'm going to deliver today and just give everyone an update as to where we are with our emerging strategy. The idea around the work that we're doing at the moment is to develop a strategy which will set the council's agenda for probably the next 3 years beyond the term of the next election. In doing so, we're looking very much to sharpen our focus, to ensure that we are, as a council, doing the right things for the communities we represent, to create specific targets against which performance will be measured and judged, and to provide clarity to lead members about their responsibilities for projects that they will be pushing forward as part of this strategy. It is not about setting a completely new strategy. It's about taking what we have learned over the last year and aligning our efforts to both recovery and future benefits that we would like to bring to our area. Much of the work that we've put into developing this strategy has already been done through the recovery plan and the work we've done there, the groups that have taken place and ideas that have been brought forward at those groups, and of course our existing budget priorities. So on the slide that you can see in front of you, you'll see the inputs to the strategic plan coming from those areas, and much of that work, as I say, has already been done. I think it's important to note in this process that something like 90%, maybe 95% of what the council does is about delivery of statutory services. These will continue, although there may be parts of our strategy that are aimed at improving or developing those services. So most of the emerging strategy will be about that other 10%. What should we be doing? What should we be influencing or working on to further improve the place where we live and to help the people who live there? What we're intending to do over coming months is to develop that strategy into a document that we can then take out and have further engagement with key stakeholders in order to refine that strategy into something that we will adopt around the middle of the year. So much of that initial work has already been done and is already noted. There have been ideas and suggestions coming forward from the recovery plan and existing budget priorities, and these will be bundled together and reviewed as part of that development process. The development process will be taking place up until the 10th of May. That is in part due to a problem which we will encounter over talking to stakeholders and going out and putting our strategy in front of stakeholders, which will be that around the end of this month, around the 26th of March, the council will be going into purdah in view of up and coming elections in the early part of May. However, we can do this work internally and we'll aim to commence a dialogue with key stakeholders from the 10th of May onwards, lasting for a period of 6 weeks. So the process will revolve around taking those bundles of ideas and thoughts and developing them within a number of theme sessions that will be run internally within the Hub Committee. Those ideas will be grouped, very broadly speaking, into a number of themes: community and well-being, housing, the economy, climate environment, and council services and resources, to bring forward proposals and targets which can be further considered by members at a number of informal council sessions we're going to run to make sure that we get the input of the wider membership. That, as I say, will bring everything forward into a document which will be used to engage key stakeholders in additional dialogue. And over that next period, after the 10th of May, the strategy will be refined and with stakeholder input concluding around the 18th of June. The plan is that the strategy should be ready to be adopted by Hub on the 20th of July and then brought to council at a date to be determined in July, so that we can quite quickly move from taking those ideas, formulating them into targets and objectives, working out what it is that we need to do and getting that agreed so that we can start work on bringing those situations about and implementing the strategy. So that's setting out the timeline. Obviously, things will emerge and I fully hope there will be full collaboration and conversations amongst members of the council over coming weeks, which will keep you informed and up to date as to where we're going. Not all of the ideas that have been put forward are likely to end up in the strategy. We're looking at focusing on things that will make a real difference. We also need to have a mind on the resources that we have available and that we need to be effective and value driven. But that sets out the timeline and the process that we're going to go through. I'd be really happy to take any questions if anyone has any about the process and the proposals that I've laid in front of you today. Are there any questions, members? Councillor Cheadle.
Thank you, Neil. Well, not so much a question, more a plea, perhaps. Given the timeline and the sort of direction of travel that particularly hub members will have specific responsibilities for delivering the corporate plan, their element of the corporate plan, it won't have been settled until after the Council's AGM in May. So I would just ask members that are minded to think about taking up a hub position on the new council after May, to start paying particular interest in this plan, because you may find yourself in a seat being asked to deliver specific aspects which won't become clear until sort of the beginning of July. So I think it's just a sort of reminder that we're going to have to be flexible about who's doing what and what is being done until this plan is sort of firmly bolted into place.
Thank you, Councillor Cheadle. I'd agree with that. And actually, one of the things that I want to get coming out of the plan is perhaps, for want of a better expression, a more balanced distribution of workload amongst lead members, so that responsibility and opportunity is spread throughout the hub committee. That will enable more focus, I think, on individual projects and I hope more improved roles and contributions from everybody. So there's a balancing act as well to make sure we get the most out of the resources that we have. Okay, so I've got no other comments coming forward, so I hope that was a useful update. We will keep everyone posted, and there's going to be a lot of activity taking place over coming weeks, as you can see. But if we can take that then as noted and move on to the next item on the agenda. So, Mr. White, the item is item 8, Better Homes, Better Lives, the adoption of South Hams and West Devon Housing Strategy 2021 to 2026. If I could ask Councillor Sellis to please introduce this item.
Thank you, Leader. Afternoon, members. Please find the members today are asked to recommend to full council the adoption of the 5-year housing strategy, Better Homes, Better Lives. As a comprehensive ambition and aspiration of this council in meeting housing need in the borough, we will all recall that a draft document went out to public consultation over the winter months. Based on the responses from the public, some changes have been made to the final document. These changes are less on the priorities that we set and more around clarity. The strategy still centres around 2 themes: housing for place and housing for people, with emphasis on climate change, partnership working, and making sure residents have good access to advice and assistance. We also commit to making best use of our evidence going forward. Under each theme are 2 priorities and a list of high-level actions which members will recognise as the issues they wish to focus on following the survey they completed and workshop they attended in the autumn. Accompanying the strategy document is a detailed delivery plan. This will be refreshed each year with a report to members on progress and priority setting for the forthcoming year. This annual report will give the opportunity for members to retain oversight of the strategy and ensure it is delivering for our residents and communities. This is a 5-year plan. Writing it during a global pandemic has been challenging, and there are many, many unknowns. Our plan is flexible enough to adapt to a changing world, but our priorities will continue to stand true. Thank you, Leader. That's my introduction. And if members have any questions and concerns.
Thank you, Councillor Sayers. Members, any questions? Councillor Edmonds.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, page 49 of the document. I think it's in the annual delivery plan. It talks about affordable homes, and it's just got XX. And I'm just wondering, have we agreed a number of affordable homes at this stage, or is that something that's to be determined after discussion by sort of the various stakeholders?
Yeah, thanks. I'll defer to Isabel Blake, if I may, on that, please.
Yes, thanks for the question, Councillor Edmonds. Yes, we are going to use the figures that were in the JLP, but they are calculated slightly different, so we have to work out how we're going to display those properly. But it will be a number that will be the same as what's in the JLP.
You don't happen to know what that number is off the top of your head?
I thought I can't, but I will try and find out. I will endeavour to find out by the end of the meeting.
I was just interested to know what sort of number that we are aiming, obviously, to achieve, especially as about half of the responses in the question 6 of the consultation document identified affordable housing as a priority. And kind of on the same theme, on page 32 of the agenda papers, it talks about that 129 households have registered an interest in the shared ownership scheme. Is it possible to establish how many rent-to-buy or shared ownership properties are likely to be available on sites currently under construction or likely to commence construction in the next 1 to 2 years? And also, can local residents be given priority for these properties? Now, I appreciate you probably haven't got that figure available just at this second, but I was just interested to know in general, is that something we're able to balance, i.e. indicative demand for shared ownership or intermediate housing, I think it's called, and the likely supply in the short term? Thank you.
If I could, I'll defer to Cassandra Harrison, who's on the call, who can answer the question about the forward plan.
Thanks, Lizzie.
Good afternoon, members. Yeah, I'm just opening up a spreadsheet which has got the numbers in West Devon who are seeking shared ownership and discount sale properties. And just having a look here, yeah, we've got 75 households registered with Help to Buy South. So they hold the waiting list for all discount or shared ownership properties in the southwest.
Excuse me, Cassandra, are you actually showing something, sharing? Because we've just got the recommendations on the screen, that's all.
No, we're not sharing.
No, I'm not sharing. I'm just looking at a spreadsheet that I had from the waiting list figures. So yes, we've got 75 households registered in West Devon.
Yeah, but is it possible to balance that or calculate what the likely supply of property, affordable homes, i.e. shared ownership, either under construction or likely to commence within a short period of time? So in other words, are we be able to satisfy, what's the chances of satisfying that demand in the short term?
In the short term, we wouldn't meet that need, but the point of our delivery programme, particularly with allocated sites coming forward in the joint local plan, we hope to meet more of that need. I mean, I can look at what we've got we've got quite a few sites coming forward in Tavistock this year, which includes quite a large number of shared ownership properties. And we've also got some sites in Oakhampton. In fact, we've got some rent to buy schemes advertised this week on Devon Home Choice for Rent Plus in Tavistock, which is where applicants would rent for up to 5 to 10 years and then with a view to purchase a property. Good.
That's encouraging. That's a really good scheme.
So that's at the tours in Tavistock.
Yeah. Good. So it is, you know, we are making progress to get in towards meeting the demand that we're seeing coming forward.
Yes, yeah. And just on your first question about are we meeting the need, at the recent Joint Local Plan Partnership Board annual general meeting, we are actually doing very well considering we're 5 years into the plan, and we've met 30% of the target of affordable housing to be delivered across Plymouth, South Hams and West Devon. So since the start of the Joint Local Plan, we've actually delivered 164 affordable homes in West Devon.
Oh, that's good.
So that's 30% of our target met for the lifetime of the plan.
Okay. Thank you for your answers.
Thank you, Cassandra. Thank you, Councillor Edmonds. I had a message from Mr. Brooke who says there are 6,600 affordable homes across the JLP area, and he'll be able to get some updated figures to members after the meeting. Councillor Daniel, a question from the floor.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to ask about social housing, because I find that the term affordable housing is very broad as to what type of housing it contains, and certainly in rural areas there's a lot of need for affordable rentals to enable families and people to stay in their local area, and I'd really like to have this as a separate category so that we can see exactly what is happening and what is being built, and also to meet the need for affordable rentals rather than affordable to buy. And is this going to be possible in the future, that we can have a bit more detail rather than just have the term affordable homes, you know, exactly what this means and what is included in this? Thank you.
Yes, we can provide that information. In fact, we record that. We actually break that down into the different types of tenures of affordable homes that are delivered each year. So moving forward, when we do annual updates of the delivery plan, we can break that down into what's rented and what shared ownership so that it's clearer.
Okay, thank you.
That would be really useful for members. And I think I draw attention to the glossary at the back. You know, even looking at affordable housing in the glossary, it describes it. But I'm with Councillor Daniels on that one. It's not particularly descriptive, is it?
Right, thank you, councillors. Are there any other questions? In which case, Councillor Sellis, could I ask you to move the recommendations?
Yes, happy to. The recommendation 1, recommend to council the adoption of Better Homes, Better Lives, the South Hams and West Devon Housing Strategy 2021 to 2026, appended as Appendix 1 to this report, and 2, agree the delivery plan for 2021 that supports the South Hams and West Devon Housing Strategy 2021 to 2026 as appended as Appendix 2 to this report. Thank you, Leader.
Thank you. Could we have a seconder for those recommendations, please?
Happy to second, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Mott. Members, any debate? Councillor Leach.
Yes, I just thought I'd come in here with my health and well-being hat on. There's a statement here that's quite correct. has a fundamental influence on our residents' health and well-being. It's something very close to my heart when it comes to housing, where nationally there's a massive problem with damp in not only old properties, but quite modern buildings that needs to be addressed. Also, when it comes to the quality of housing, I think whether building regs change or not, we should have some influence on the quality of houses that are built within our borough. And finally, when it comes to affordability, I, like Councillor Daniels, am very concerned that where you've got shared equity, that's quite often not affordable for people unless they've got two incomes. When it comes to 80% of market values, again, with the wages and rates we get in our borough, that's not necessarily affordable either. I'd like to see affordable based purely around social housing, good quality, low rent social housing, which I'm sure we can pick up. I just wanted to emphasise that's what we should be doing. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Leach. Any other debate, members? In which case we'll move to a vote. I think, Mr. White, if it's okay with you, we'll do this on an exception basis. Councillor Sellis.
Thank you. Thank you. Just for the record, I would like to thank all the officers that have been able to produce this on top of all the added work associated with the pandemic. They really have been working incredibly hard, and I would like that noted, please, Leader.
Yes, thank you. Noted. I agree. It's a really good report and excellent report for us to have. I'm going to take it by exception. So if anybody is not prepared to approve the recommendations and vote for the recommendations, perhaps you, out of hub members, perhaps you'd like to indicate now. I've got nothing coming forward, Mr. White, so I will take that as approved.
Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you, everyone. If we could move to item 9 on the agenda. Community housing, Brentor and Lamerton projects. Councillor Sellis, if you could introduce this paper, please.
Thank you. Well, we're being asked to note the revised management structure of the community housing programme jointly between the Head of Housing, Revenues and Benefits, Community and Housing Need and the Heads of Asset. And we're to consider and approve the principles of the community housing scheme as set out in section 3. We note that the Brentor and Lamerton scheme, that the Lamerton scheme is not proceedable at this time, and we will be hopefully recommending to Council to approve the expenditure of 85,000 for the Innovation Fund Invest to Earn earmarked reserve to undertake detailed design, specifications and tendering of the Brentor scheme, subject to a successful planning application. I believe the introduction is in the recommendations, really, Leader. Is that adequate for you?
Thank you, that's fine. Any questions, members?
I do have a question, and I'm prepared to take my turn if others want to ask first.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Edmonds.
Thank you, Chair. Can I start by saying that I'm very much in favour of community housing schemes, as they provide a real opportunity to provide much needed affordable housing in small rural communities. So I'm very much hoping the Brentor scheme goes ahead. But I would like to raise a few points, if I may, please, just for my clarification. If I look at, yes, this is the Brentor scheme. So 5.16, section 516, and I'm very conscious I need to be careful how I handle this, because some of the items are exempt. So I've based my questions hopefully around the information that is available in the public report. So we know that the cost of moving this forward is 85,000, and that's got to be funded outside of the original grant received from government, and this figure is at risk, obviously, should the project not proceed. But if I calculate that the total spend on both projects at 285,000, and the grant was 247,000. So that's an overspend of 38. So is it fair to say then that the at-risk amount is 85,000 plus the 38, which makes a total of 123,000? So that's kind of point one. To date, the council spent 146,000 getting the scheme ready for submission of a planning application. I'm presuming that would include the planning fees. So it's just to clarify whether fees are including in this amount, or is it in the 85? I also note that Lamerton Development referred to a Homes England grant of 450,000 towards the cost of the build. And I wonder if this will be available for the Brentor scheme. So maybe if I pause there, because I'm conscious of two or three, but if I may, Chair, then I do think I've got perhaps one or two additional questions, but maybe it'd be fair to cover those off before I go any further. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Edmonds. Mr. Brooke, are you able to answer those questions as things stand?
Thank you, Chairman. Happy to, yeah. So, Councillor Edmonds, yes. So your first question about the overspend, etc. There's been, although the two main schemes are Lamerton and Brentor, there's work done on other things. So the £85,000 additional expenditure at risk is in totality. The other money has been spent on, there's other budgets for staffing, etc. So if you like, it's not unquantified money that's at risk. What's been spent has been spent, that is committed. And then the new finance of the 85,000 is the additional expenditure that would be at risk. And that, but that, going on to a second question, that doesn't include planning fees. They've already been paid. 5,500 that was the planning fee for Brentor to DNP. Well, actually, it's not been paid to them. It's been transferred to the architect, who will then pay them. But anyway, they are effectively budgeted for. And the Homes England grant, that specific grant isn't available anymore. Homes England grants have evolved over time. And in fact, that's one of the reasons for the delay with Brentor. But because the original grant was based on infrastructure, that ceased. And then there's a new grant scheme that's now become available. And we do anticipate there being Homes England grant available for Brentor. So yes, there is some grant, but it's not the same one.
Oh, okay. Well, that's positive. So it sounds as though there may be some help towards the development costs. And talking of development costs, if I may, Chair, move on to 5.2 of the report, and this figure is in the report, so hopefully I'm not I'm at liberty to mention this, but it says the cost of the scheme is currently estimated 2.8 million. That's set out in the business case, which is an exempt item. But I'm wondering, is there a risk that development costs could increase, as we saw at Lamerton, where the build cost rose from just under 2.9 million in early 19 to 4.5 million by November 20. And my second point on that is, viability is challenging, I think the report mentions. And I wonder if we've considered modular homes, which I believe make small scale development far more viable and are designed to far higher environmental standards. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Two interesting questions. I know a bit about the Lamerton situation, and there was a very particular change in circumstance occasioned by surveys that were carried out on the site that led to the majority of that increase in cost. But perhaps I can ask Mr. Brooke to give a little more detail and to comment on your other question.
Thank you, Chairman. I think the figure in the business case absolutely 100% will change because for a start, we're going to go through a planning process, which invariably will lead to design changes because that is inevitable, I would say. And then when we get down to the tender process, that's another, there'll be a detailed design phase and then there'll be a tender process. So yes, the scheme will change because we don't know everything about it yet. And that is why the £85,000 is at risk, because it's more fundamental than just because we need to get planning, because I think we're optimistic that we will be able to get planning. But the real question is, will we be able to get, when we know we've got planning, we will then be able to dust down the scheme and take it through a gateway process to make sure that the costs post-planning reflect the pre-planning position. So that's one gateway. We would then need to go through another detailed design phase where we would start to spend some money. That would lead to another set of criteria, and we would then take that through a final gateway, which we would then tender, and that's the ultimate time when we would know what the build costs are. And even when you get a tender price, you still have to have a risk mitigation pot, because there are some things that no matter how well you've planned for, you can't foresee or control. So construction carries risk, and we are still, in spite of the amount of money that we've had to spend to get to this stage, quite early on in the evolution of Brent Tor. So there is mitigation. Sorry, there is a risk pot included in the viability, but it would be remiss of us to say that we've got it all, that we can foresee every eventuality, because we can't. So I think the answer to that first question, which is a really good one, is the best we can do is have our 10% contingency, and we can take the scheme through very clear gateways. And at each gateway, we will check the viability and keep members informed. And that way we balance expenditure risk against the likelihood of succeeding in what we want to do, which hopefully will address some of the concerns that were raised in the previous item of the housing strategy. The members were all talking about affordable housing, the need for tackling this. So I think it's the right thing to do, but yes, there are risks if we continue down this route. And in terms of modular housing, Councillor Evans, we've looked at some length at modular houses, and I'm very, very keen supporter of them. They have a place. Unfortunately, they don't always solve they give you cost certainty on the bit above ground. They don't change the associated infrastructure with drainage and the foundations and the access roads and all the other unknown costs. So they de-risk a section of the construction, but not its entirety. And they do deliver to a higher quality quite often. I agree with that. But there's often a critical mass you need to surpass where they become affordable. So their cost per metre squared are perhaps 10% higher at the scale we're talking about at the moment. So yes, very interested, but whether it would work for this site is less clear. I think perhaps not probably the route we'll end up going down in terms of balancing that quality of construction and that viability. And we need to find that sweet spot. So yeah, thank you, Chairman. I hope that answers those questions.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Brooke. Yes, thanks for those comprehensive answers, and I really do hope you are able to balance the viability of the project. Having come this far, I think it would be excellent for obviously Brent Tor, and excellent for the council, and of course those people that hopefully will be able to take advantage of these properties when they're built. So I really do hope we're able to proceed. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Edmonds. Councillor Leach.
Thank you. My question is on Lamerton 6.3. It actually says the scheme viability had always been particularly challenging. When we say always, is that literally from the concept of this, or did that become apparent as we went through? That's number one question. 6.4 says that infrastructure costs went from 390k up to 1.1 million. Can you tell me who came up with 390k and what details of information did the person or company have to come up with that figure. That's it.
Mr. Brooke, you able to give any detail on that? I think I could give an approximate answer.
Yeah. Well, would you like to start, Chairman?
Well, I think, Councillor Leach, the two figures, from my knowledge, were in relation to completely different situations. The first figure was around a particular site plan and location for the proposed development. It became very clear as the subject of more intense investigations, including drilling boreholes on the site, that there was a particular drainage problem on the site, which would require some really extensive engineering to create an attenuation tank. That in turn would mean that the access to the site needed to be changed, and there were more complications. So the second figure was in relation to a much different proposal. I don't know whether you can add anything to that, Mr. Brooke.
Thank you, Leader. Yeah, I mean, that's exactly right. So the answer, putting it fairly starkly, at the beginning, there was a very, very, very high level estimate based on very little information, because you don't have it at the initial stage. And it would have been an area rate type of approach, and it comes with a risk factor, which is reflected here. Unfortunately, the specifics of the site, exactly as our leader has just set out, meant that it changed far more than you would anticipate. And that's the difference. So the last price is very high, but probably quite accurate, and the first price is low, but totally inaccurate. And that just reflects, as you progress with the scheme, the level of understanding and information you have to hand. Just returning to the original question around it always being the viability and it always being challenging. It has always been challenging. If you like, affordable housing schemes have to be always challenging, because we never set out to make any money on these schemes. Then they're absolutely not about that. They're about delivering the most number of affordable houses to the community and just covering the costs of doing that. So if I ever saw a business appraisal or a viability appraisal for a community housing scheme that showed it to be too good, I would be it would be wrong, but because it misses the fundamental principle. So you always need to discount the houses as much as you can to get the answer 0 at the end on the viability. And this one started at that point. The seesaw was balanced and there was a reasonable discount to market, but with little information. And then as the site progressed, the detail and understanding grew, and the seesaw remained balanced until it finally tipped slightly the wrong way. And that was unfortunate in this case. Thank you, Lina.
Thank you. Finally, the recommendation for Lamerton is actually, it states something like, is not viable at this time. Do you see a time in the future where it could be viable?
Leader, would you like me to attempt to answer
yes,
that?
Mr. Brooke, would you
I think there is a set of unknowns that could play out in front of us over the medium term, which would allow us potentially to come back and revisit this. But there are a lot of other outside factors for which we have no control. Indeed, the landowner and what they decide to do, and the neighbourhood plan and what they decide to do, and the politics of this, and Homes England grant position, and our revenue position, and our strategy around delivering housing more generally associated with the previous item and the 5-year look forward. So it's incredibly difficult to give any accuracy to that answer. I suppose there is a remote possibility. We do have work done, which has a value and is useful should we come to revisit it, but the likelihood of that in the current time, I think, is quite small.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Leach. Councillor Pearce.
Thank you, Leader. My question is to do with 6.2 and the Lamerton scheme. I'm a little concerned about the wording of some housing need identified. Was there a housing survey carried out, a housing needs survey carried out for Lamerton before this scheme was thought about or implemented to get as far as we've gone now? Because it's something that I feel we're going to have to be very careful with looking at our previous item to do with our Better Homes, Better Lives, where we've got to identify a need before spending substantial amounts of money, as we have done here. And I'm just wondering, with the way that wording is, it appears that there may not have been a housing needs survey carried out. Could I have that confirmed, please?
Thank you. Mr. Brooke, do you have that information?
Yes, it was carried out. It was carried out by, it's on the, I think it's on the parish website, and it was undertaken. I think the concern we had with it wasn't that it didn't happen, because it did, but I don't think the engagement with it was as good as it could have been. And that's why it was supported by a number of other slightly softer versions of a community housing need based on kind of engagement in terms of drop-in and other community engagement strategies. So yes, it was carried out, and I agree. If we think ahead in terms of ensuring that we get this absolutely right always in the future, that housing needs assessment is fundamental. And without that, and without 100% confidence in it, then we shouldn't probably be speculating on schemes. So it's a good question, but there was one done.
Okay, thank you. Yes, I mean, I think it's critical that we do have accurate housing needs surveys, and certainly, you know, when this sum of money is involved, you know, it's as I say, it is critical. Thank you, Mr. Brooke.
Thank you, Councillor Pearce. I agree with you. I think it is absolutely critical. Question from the floor, Councillor Ewings.
Thank you, Chair. My question is we refer to the staffing costs, etc., within the figure of the overspend for Lamerton scheme. And my question is, what would the staff have been doing if they were not involved with Lamerton, because that's their day job? And did we then employ additional staff or whatever that is where the extra costs are? Thank you.
Leader, would you like me just to address that?
Yes, please, Mr. Brooke.
Yeah, the staff costs are really quite small, because the so we employed additional staff specifically to do community housing. So they're not on the books, if you like. They're funded through the grant funding we originally received, or were. And the ratio of the staff costs were very, very much reflective of the grant sizes, respectively, between West Devon and South Hams. So 15% of the staff costs, which was a part-time level 4 and more recently a level 6 specialist, are very much allocated towards South Hams. So the amount of staff cost is quite small, and it's funded from the grant funding that we had to date. So I suppose, had there been no West Devon schemes, and that's not been the case, so there has been a legitimate staff time allowance, then we would have had to review the programme and how those staffs were funded. But that didn't arise. They did have more than enough work to keep them busy. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Brooke.
Thank you. Councillor Sellis.
Thank you very much, Leader. Thank you, Mr. Brooks. We note on page 125, bullet point 2.5, that there's to be a governance review, and perhaps you might like to add something to that. But my main question, please, is, given the questions and answers that we've just listened to, and I thank the councillors, especially Councillor Leach, because that was a question I was going to ask. The bottom line to me is that residents are waiting to be housed, and we talk and work about land acquisition, planning process, many hours of officer and member time, and still families wait. So the purpose of this, there are still vulnerable, in many cases, I believe, families that are waiting in some hope to get some accommodation. And I just wonder, you know, given I personally think this eye-watering, the amounts of money that have been spent. Would West Devon be better buying off the peg open market homes which are already built and ready for people to move in? That's my question, because there's quite a lot of houses out there. And thank you.
Leader, would you like me to respond to that?
I would indeed, yes. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Sellis. in a minute, I'll ask Drew to reply to you about the governance review, if that's appropriate, because he's going to lead that for us.
That's fine, thank you.
I think there is a policy argument around the best way to serve housing need, and that is exactly what the housing strategy is for. And I think working with Izzy and others, and Laura as head of assets, Councillor Sellis, I think it's really important that the priorities of the housing strategy and the annual delivery plan reflect the policy position that West Devon takes. That is, as an aside, the money we were given from the precursor to Homes England, as it was then, was specific, which it was to deliver and develop new homes. So, if you like, it wasn't what shall we do with it? It was clear that that was what it was for. We didn't have to spend it ourselves, but we had to either spend it ourselves or give it to others that were going to develop, because it was the government's way of trialling basically kickstarting the public sector to start building houses again. They had a vision that they could get the public sector to start building 150,000 homes a year, which hasn't happened. There's plenty of good reasons for that. So I think it's a valid question. I think it's a housing strategy question rather than how does it reflect onto the community housing scheme, which forms a very small part, I believe, of the wider housing strategy and annual delivery plan. But yes, I'm absolutely happy to have that conversation with Izzy and others in the room if that's helpful.
Yes, thank you very much. If I may, Leader. Yeah, because the bottom line is we do need the housing, and I was well aware that the Homes England money was for the purpose of, which you described. I'm aware of that, but it just seems to me that we lurch at times through so many hurdles and obstacles and officer time and everything like that. And I think it is a relevant and strong question to ask on behalf of the residents which are requiring our help. And given that the council has bought properties outside of West Devon as well as in Devon, invest to earn, I think that this is an area which we should give due consideration. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Councillor Sellis, and I'm sure as part of a general portfolio, it's something that we would always consider. We have, I'm sure you recall, purchased some properties which we had the opportunity to do so in Oakhampton that have been well used, I think, and I certainly wouldn't rule out any model that we might want to look at. But of course, I think Mr. Brooke makes a really good point that the purpose of this particular funding is to bring homes that are significantly below market values, either in terms of rental or sale values, to the market for specific purposes. And I suppose we need, as an organisation, to be able to build the expertise and the capacity to be able to do that, because as you can see, it is quite complex. Okay, Councillor Moody, you have a question.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, as I'd like to refer to Section 6, which is Lamerton. For me, the report actually raises more questions than answers some of my concerns. I understand from Councillor Pearce that the question he asked about housing need, that we now have confirmed that West Devon didn't undertake a housing needs study. It was done externally. But in 6.2, the report says that this review this is a SLT review, concluded, whilst there is some evidence of housing need and the design of the scheme should be deliverable in planning terms, the viability of the scheme was not accepted or not acceptable. I just wanted to know, if it wasn't acceptable at an early stage, why did we progress with it?
Thank you, Councillor Moody. I think the answer to that is that at an early stage, the figures we had indicated that it was acceptable. As Mr. Brooke has explained, because of the margins that you're working on, very fine margins, and obviously you're trying to bring this forward without having properties at market rates. On this particular site, there was a large percentage of below market rate housing plan. What happened was a significant change in the underlying cost structure of bringing that development forward. and that only happened fairly late in the day. Sorry, Mr. Councillor Moody.
Could I just come back? What I'm curious about is the project was priced in November 2020, and then at 6.2 an internal review of the project was undertaken, and at that point it was seen as not acceptable, the viability of the scheme. What internal review? It's not in the report.
Sorry, I missed that point, Councillor Moody. I don't know if it was your end or my end. About the internal review, I think.
Yeah, I think Councillor Moody's dropped off the call.
Okay, I think Councillor Moody's question was about the nature of the internal review that took place within SLT, as I understand it. Are you there, Councillor Moody?
Can you hear me?
I can now, yeah. Sorry, I think we missed your question about the internal review. Was it just what's the nature of that review?
I'll take my headset. Now, the point I was making is that in the report, it's not clear the time scale between November 2020 and the internal review. When was the internal review carried out, and why did it progress when the internal review decided that the scheme was not acceptable, the viability of the scheme?
Okay, I think the answer to that is that it didn't, but Mr. Brooke, as I understand it, the internal review was when that information came forward in November, and that was the point at which a decision was effectively made.
That's right, Leader. So, as you can imagine, had it been a very viable scheme, I suspect there would have been much. It's easier to say yes than it is to say no. You clearly don't want to stop let alone work you've done go. And so when the viability came in, it was. Well, it's as we set out in the report, it was unacceptable, but it was absolutely right that we reviewed it both at a technical and operational level, which happened as soon as it arrived by the team, and then it was discussed by myself, and then it was rightly so, I believe, discussed at SLT to make sure that we picked up the wider position on that, and that happened early. So it came in November, and it happened early in the following year, and that's what's led to this reporting process. So there wasn't actually a long time frame between the final report coming in and us making that decision. Thank you, Leader. Thank you, Councillor Moody.
Thank you very much. I've got a further question about this drainage issue.
Yeah.
There's no details of what the drainage issue and the complications were. It just says that there was an increase in infrastructure cost, and then, Leader, you then said that it was just to do with they drilled boreholes and there were drainage issues. I'm not certain what the drainage issues are. Are you able to elaborate on those?
My understanding is that it would have required the building of a large attenuation tank under part of the site in order to take runoff water. I don't know, Mr. Brooke, whether you're able to give any more insight into that.
That's absolutely right. I mean, there's lots and lots, as you would imagine, lots and lots of different things that changed as a result of all of the various due diligence. It wasn't just drainage, but that was a significant part of it. The access road was another part of it, which had to be realigned. So yes, so the borehole testing was done for real. There's a cost to that. You've got to get a contractor to go out and do it. It takes time. You don't do it lightly. It's on that data that you then design your final attenuation tank. It rains a lot around these parts and the ground generally doesn't drain very well. That led to basically a huge attenuation tank as opposed to a soakaway. An attenuation tank requires a very, very big hole. A big hole costs a lot of money. That was part of the infrastructure problems. So it's not unusual, but it is unfortunate.
And thank you very much. Could I just come back also on the increase from 2.9 million to 4.5 million, which is the 6.5 there. Is that additional cost of the build cost? Does that include this new drainage issue?
So Leader, if I may, so the cost of the houses didn't vary significantly across the life of the project. And as I said at the beginning, the cost of houses above ground is quite easy to estimate. That's an easy job for any QS. They got that relatively right. The cost of all of the bits that we didn't know about evolved over the time. And yes, the number of houses on the site changed, the number of affordable houses on the sites changed, the number of Homes England grant changed, the planning position and the requirements of the planning authority changed. Lots and lots of things changed, as they do when they move from a concept feasibility through to detailed design. That's to be expected. And in this case, whilst you would expect there to be a variation in the scheme cost with any development like this, as we've mentioned, to do with drainage and access, some of the costs were greater than were anticipated. And that's but what happened was at the beginning of the scheme, we didn't have any Homes England grant, and towards the middle and end we did. So although the scheme cost increased significantly, the amount of Homes England grant we were able to gear in, which was nearly £500,000, also increased. So in fact, the viability didn't change anywhere near as significantly from start to finish as the construction price did. So it's important with these schemes that you don't just take one figure and highlight that. It's a interrelated and quite complex set of figures and data, but absolutely valid questions.
Thank you very much. It's just that I'm curious at what the 1.6 million in uplift in build cost is attributable to. Is it solely the realignment of the road and the attenuation down the drainage issues, or are there other factors?
Sorry, yeah, no, I think, sorry, apologies if I didn't make that clear. There were lots of infrastructure elements as well as design changes. So it's a multitude of factors, which I can't really summarise in this meeting, I'm afraid, but I'd be happy to. Right.
Okay. It's just that as members, we haven't had those figures to look at. Also, and my final question, I'm sorry to ask so many questions, is that in 6.8 you've said that the strong local opposition occurred at Lamerton regarding the site, and the significance of the neighbourhood plan. What weight whether this piece of land is in or out of the neighbourhood plan, would that affect, or has that affected, the decision to proceed?
Would you like me to have a go at answering that, Mr. Brooke? I don't think it would have affected the decision to proceed, other than, of course, a community housing scheme of this nature does require community support. I think there was a real possibility at one point that that might not have been forthcoming. Nothing at the moment has changed in terms of the neighbourhood plan. And the opposition per se would not, I think, have stopped us from bringing a scheme forward if it had the support of the parish council.
Right. Okay. Thank you very much for that. As I say, sorry for the length of questions there, but that's very helpful.
That's right. This is 4 questions, Councillor Moody, so you've done exactly the right thing. Councillor Leach.
Yeah, this is probably a silly one, but for clarification. So I'm assuming that 6.4, actually the evidence of 6.4 came before 6.2. I think that's where there might be some slight confusion. And it looks like there was this review going on, and then later on this figure came in. So it's just clarification. 6.4, that information was gleaned and came forward before the review took place.
Yeah, Leader, if I may, yeah, absolutely. The review was based on all of the facts available at the time, which included the latest pricing information and all of the kind of due diligence. So yes, apologies if the order in the report is a little bit misleading, but as you would hope, the review took account of all of the information we had at that time, which is everything we have to date.
That's fine, thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Leach. Councillor Sellis, I wonder if you would like to move the recommendations for item 9, please. Councillor Sellis, are you still there? Are you able to move the recommendations?
Sorry, I was on mute. Yes. Yes, sorry, Leader. Do you want me to read them out for people who may be listening, or would you just like me to move the recommendations as written?
I think we can move them as written.
All right.
Councillor.
Thank you. So there's all included the recommendations 1, 2, 3 and 4. I move the recommendations.
Thank you. Could we have a seconder for those recommendations, please?
Happy to second those.
Okay, members, any debate? Councillor Edmonds.
Thank you, Chair. Well, I'd just like to reiterate my support for community housing schemes, and I acknowledge just how challenging they are to deliver. We've come a long way with the Brentford scheme, and I hope we're able to deliver a viable project at the end of the day. So I will be supporting the recommendations, including approval of 85,000 to move this project to the next stage. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Edmonds. Any other debate, members? Councillor Pearce.
Thank you, Leader. Yes, I would just like to say that there's a lot of work gone into the Brentford scheme, and we've come a long way, and with the support of the community and the parish council. And it'll be a great shame if this doesn't move forward once we've got planning approval. It does meet the needs expressed by some members for socially rented. And there's a good mix, and this is what's come forward after our housing needs survey have done. I think we've taken into account 2 public consultations, so it is been well gone into the situation. I think really what concerns me going forward is the fact that central government are still pushing the opportunity for people to purchase. And we've only got to see from the reports from Cornwall yesterday with what's happening with private landlords moving out of the business, if you like, and so many people looking for rented accommodation. And I think it's something we're going to have to look at very strongly, and perhaps lobby government that there should be more money available for building high quality socially rented accommodation, because there are always going to be people who need this type of accommodation, however buoyant the economy is. And once we get into a period of increasing interest rates, which I believe will be likely within the next 18 months, the people who've got huge mortgages are going to be really struggling to pay them. And I think then it'll bring into play the need for more socially rented housing, because there won't be the number of private landlords in the trade as there have been in the past. Thank you, Leader.
Thank you, Councillor Pearson. I agree with you on that whole premise about social housing and rented and rents, and this is the way that we get to do that, and we need to get better at doing it and get more opportunities, in my view. Councillor Ewings.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I was just going to bring up and to correct something that you'd said. In 6.7 of the report, it actually does say that the parish council initially supported the plan, the scheme, and the neighbourhood plan committee group also supported the scheme. But I understand over further time there has been a lot of opposition to this, etc. And many parish councillors resigned over this issue, to the fact that they only now have 3 parish councillors. Was the vote overturned, or can you elaborate as to where the support is now in the village for a scheme for us going forward? Thank you.
I can only comment on what I know on the parish council. The parish council has not overturned their support for the scheme, but it has, our withdrawal from the scheme has caused some difficulties, and in particular some difficulties with regards to the neighbourhood plan, which appears to have stalled slightly and does need moving forward. How it gets moved forward, I think, is a matter for a decision within the community. But there's been no overturning of the official support by the parish council. There is a lot of debate, obviously, within the village, and my feeling is there is a considerable number of people there who would still be supportive of such a scheme. But there are obviously two sides to the argument. I can't really elaborate any more than that, I'm afraid.
Thank you very much, Chairman. That does actually put a bit of flesh on the bones. Thank you.
Councillor Cheadle.
Thanks very much. Well, first of all, I'd like to say that I too support this scheme. As Mr. Brooks said, these are challenging projects, but they're hugely worthwhile. So we should be walking towards this challenge rather than running away from it. And I very much think we should go the extra mile to support the Brent Tor one, and not be too critical that sometimes some of these challenging and difficult projects don't come off. There is a risk associated with all of them. So I'm not at all surprised that every now and again there's a bump in the road. There was reference to a governance review, and I think that's a good thing. And I would welcome news that once the governance review has been conducted, a report of that will be brought to the hub so we can all learn the lessons that it might teach us. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Councillor Cheadle. I agree with that entirely. A question from the floor, Councillor Daniel.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to say that I was lucky enough to be able to go and represent West Devon Borough Council on the opening of the Hastow social housing scheme in South Taunton when I first became a councillor. These were built to very high environmental standards. They were very impressive inside with heat pumps, so the bills were very low for the residents. And I was able to speak to a lot of the residents who were living now in the social housing. And all of them were really full of high praise. A lot of them had come from very damp and, not suitable private rented accommodation, had been waiting a long time on lists to get a social house. And I think I want to wholly support this scheme because I think it's really, really worthwhile to allow people to have a decent standard of living and to bring up families in good surroundings. And I think that's really important for well-being. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Daniel. Absolutely agree. Members, we're going to move to Councillor Moody.
Oh.
Thank you, Chair. Can you hear me?
I can, yeah.
Okay, I've just got a different headset on. Members, whilst I've asked a number of questions, I still think that there are further questions to be asked regarding the Lamerton application. And I understand from what Councillor Cheadle said that the road gets bumpy from time to time, but I think that we've got to learn I would like to suggest a slight amendment to item number 3 to ask for the Lamerton scheme and the report to be for members to agree that the Lamerton report is taken to ONS for scrutiny. So that would be my proposal, to make an amendment to add to item number 3 and agree that the Lamerton report be taken to ONS. I don't know whether anybody would support me on that.
Have you got? Can we put a wording to that, Mr. White? And is there a seconder for the amendment proposed by Councillor Moody?
I would second that. I think I think it does warrant scrutinising. So yes, I'll second.
Okay, so Mr. White is putting our wording up that the Lamberton scheme be subject of a further report to the ONS committee, which becomes recommendation 4, and recommendation 5 would then be to recommend the approval of expenditure. So Mr. White, that now becomes the substantive motion.
Only if the proposed and seconder of the original motion are willing to accept it, Chair. If not, we're in.
Yeah, happy to support.
And
Councillor Mott?
And Councillor Mott?
I don't really see the need to it, if I'm honest. I think we've had comprehensive reports. We've had many discussions over both schemes. We've scrutinised it now and gone through it now. I don't see the need to make more work on the subject of something that has effectively gone through due diligence and been shut down for the reasons as already set out in this report.
Good point.
Therefore, okay. Chair, we're in the realms of debating the amendment as per the red font on the screen, Chair.
Okay. So can we move to debating the amendment in that case? Anybody, anything they would like to add to that debate? Councillor Cheadle.
Well, I would just say that I think it's in the nature of our constitution and our sort of democracy that if members are concerned and wish ONS to look at something, that should be an opportunity that we support. So I would support the proposal.
Thank you. Any other debate on this subject, Mr. White? Do we then move to a vote on that?
We do indeed, Chair. If there's no more debate, we'll be literally voting on the amendment as per part 4, Leader.
Okay. So can we move to a vote then on acceptance of the amendment, which we'll do by named member?
Thank you, Leader. So members on the amendment as per part 4, Councillor Cheadle.
4.
Thank you, Councillor Edmonds.
Sorry, 4.
Thank you, Councillor Jury.
4.
Thank you, Councillor Leach.
4.
Councillor Moody.
4.
Councillor Mott.
Against.
Councillor Pearce.
4.
Councillor Samuel.
4.
And Councillor Salis.
4.
That therefore, members, is 8 votes in favour, 1 against, and the amendment is therefore declared carried and therefore forms part of the substantive motion for any further debate. Thank you, Leader.
Thank you. Any further debate on the substantive motion, members? If not, we will move to a vote on those recommendations. And again, I think because of the recommendation to approve expenditure, we'll take a named vote on these 5 recommendations.
Thank you, Leader. Therefore, members, once again, alphabetical order. Councillor Cheadle.
4.
And Councillor Edmonds.
4.
And Councillor Jury.
4.
Councillor Leach.
4.
Councillor Moody.
4.
Councillor Mott.
4.
Councillor Pearce.
4.
Councillor Samuel.
4.
And Councillor Salis.
4.
That therefore, members, parts 1 to 5 of the recommendation is therefore declared unanimously carried. Thank you, Leader.
Thank you, members. Can we move to item 10 on the agenda, please, Mr. White? Month 10 revenue budget monitoring 2020-2021. If I could ask Councillor Edmonds to please introduce this item.
Thank you, Chair. The report covers the period to the end of January and shows a projected budget underspend of £323,000. This is a much improved position compared to the December 2020 budget monitoring report, which projected a surplus of £90,000. The reasons for this significant improvement are set out in the budget forecast table, which can be found on pages 144 and 145 of the report, which I think are largely self-explanatory. We can see that COVID-19 government grant support amounts to 826,000, with COVID expenditure amounting to 280,000. There is an anticipated underspend on the salaries budget of £80,000 due to the time gap in filling vacancies. And sections 1.9 and 1.10 of the report sets out details of work required in the areas of revenues and benefits and governance assurance. And potentially this work could be supported by using some of the salary savings. The Q3 business rates pooling gain forecast shows that a pooling gain of at least £100,000 should now be achieved in 2021, which is a significant benefit to the overall financial position for 2020-21. A further significant benefit is the reduction in the projected income shortfall for commercial property investment from 165,000 in the December budget monitoring report to 50,000 in this report. Likewise, the employment estates income anticipated income shortfall has been reduced from £50,000 in December to £25,000 in January. A shortfall in investment income of 70,000 is currently anticipated due to the historic low in interest rates. Base rate is currently 0.1% and unlikely to increase in the short term, possibly not before the end of 2023. So if I can take members to the bottom half of the table on page 145, which tells us that the estimated income from the government guarantee scheme for sales, fees and charges is 437,000 by the end of this year. Government has announced that this scheme will run for the first 3 months of the new financial year and then cease. The table also reminds us that in December 2020, a sum of 220,000 was transferred to a COVID earmarked reserve. Then we have the report recommendation 3 to transfer the 80,000 salary savings into a reserve in order to cover staffing pressures in 2021-22. After taking into account the amended budget financing sources of 501,000 agreed in September of last year, we arrive at the projected surplus of £323,000, which is good news compared to the projected shortfall of £1 million reported in May 2020. So how do we use this welcome budget surplus? It's recommended to transfer the forecasted business rates pooling gain of 100,000 into the business rates retention earmark reserve and 200,000 of the projected surplus into a recovery plan and corporate strategy earmarked reserve. The remaining projected budget surplus of 23,000 is to be added to unearmarked reserves. We can now confirm that the £80,000 bid for funds from the National Leisure Recovery Fund has been successful, and this amount will be placed into the Leisure Services earmarked reserve. Appendix A provides a summary of reserves, which shows earmarked reserves standing at 3.899 million and unearmarked reserves at £1.109 million, after adding the remaining projected budget surplus of 23,000. Chair, let us be in no doubt that our current financial position is testament to the prudent management of council finances by Mrs. Buckle, Mrs. Henstock, and the finance team over a number of years. We should also acknowledge the financial support provided by government during the health crisis. A combination of these two things has brought us to a position of financial stability, but with a strong word of caution as we continue to face further uncertainty due to COVID, which is likely to be with us for the whole of the 21-22 financial year. The report recommendations, therefore, reflect an ongoing prudent approach by placing surplus funds into reserves that can be called upon, if needed, to support our COVID response, our core responsibility of delivering effective and efficient services across the whole borough. Yes, that's the whole borough, and to support our Build Back Better recovery plan. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Edmonds. I'd echo your comments about the report and the excellent work undertaken by Mrs. Buckle and her team, and thank you for your usual excellent briefing and introduction as well. Members, any questions? I have no questions coming forward, and I take that as being the excellence of both the report and the introduction. Councillor Evans, could I ask you to move the recommendations of item 10?
Yes, thank you, Chair. I move the 4 recommendations as shown on pages 139 and 140 of your agenda papers. Thank you.
Thank you. Can we have a seconder, please?
Happy to second that.
Thank you. Any debate, members? Councillor Cheadle.
Thank you, Leader. I really just want to echo what Councillor Edmonds has been saying, in that some may take this news as an opportunity for the council to sort of loosen the purse strings and splurge a bit of this welcomed sort of recovery money, and we should resist that and explain why, in that we've got unforeseen risks ahead until COVID is behind us, and it's by no means behind us yet. And so I very much welcome the cautious but optimistic approach this revenue budget predicts.
Thank you, Councillor Cheadle. Councillor Pearce.
Thank you, Leader. I have to echo those comments. Actually, I think we are in a very fortunate position considering what we've gone through over the last 12 months, and we're certainly not out of the woods yet by a long way. And I do thank Councillor Edmonds for his work, and also definitely Mrs. Buckle and her team, as once again they've guided us through a very difficult time. The problem is going to be, as we come out of COVID and the furlough scheme begins to end later this year, and we don't know what effect that's going to have on a number of costs that we have, because as people lose their jobs, which inevitably some will, it will put a strain on the council tax and business rates and various other costs that we have. So we are in a good position to meet those, and as Councillor Cheadle said, we shouldn't loosen the purse strings. We've got to keep a tight hold until we see how things work out later this year. Thank you, Leader.
Thank you, Councillor Pearce. Any other debate, members? In which case we'll move to a vote on those recommendations. And again, Mr. White will take a named vote. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Leader. Councillor Cheadle?
4.
Thank you. Councillor Edmonds?
4.
Thank you. Councillor Jewellery?
4.
Councillor Leach?
4.
Councillor Moody?
4.
Councillor Mott?
4.
Councillor Pearce?
4.
Councillor Samuel? Councillor Samuel? I'll try again. Councillor Sellis?
4.
Okay, and one last call for Councillor Samuel.
4.
Thank you. That therefore, members, is unanimously carried. Thank you, members.
Thank you, members. If we can move to item 11 on the agenda. item level 11 is capital budget monitoring 2020-2021. If I could ask Councillor Edmonds to introduce this item.
Yes, thank you, Chair. The report provides an update on the capital programme as at the 31st of January 2021. You will have noted that all capital projects are within the individual capital budgets approved by members. The programme is currently underspent due mainly to the capital schemes for the Tavistock temporary accommodation development and the community housing schemes at Brentor and Lamerton. Disabled facility grant applications have started to increase, although there is a significant budget underspend at the end of month 10. The council has been awarded a sum of £224,500 from the government's Green Homes grant of £2 billion. The grant will be used to deliver external wall insulations and air source heat pumps for eligible households and was originally due to be delivered by the end of March 2021. But thankfully, this has been extended until June 2021. I think we may have someone with us this afternoon, possibly Mr. Sexton or Mr. Powell, and I'm hoping they'll be able to provide members with further information regarding this grant. A list of Section 106 deposits is shown at Appendix C. A report on the anticipated spend of 106 deposits over the next few years will be presented to the Hub Committee in the summer. The report and Appendix B provides an update on each of the capital projects, which I think is self-explanatory. Appendix A sets out the details of the capital budget, including the amount spent to date. Both appendices contain restricted information and therefore are Part 2 items. Finally, Chair, it's recommended that the Hub Committee resolves to endorse the contents of the report. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Any questions, members? I don't think Mr. Sexton is on the call, Councillor Edmonds.
Oh,
so,
okay.
Chair, it's Mr. Powell. I can answer any of the questions on that and expand a little bit on the grants, if that would help.
That would be useful, I think, Mr. Powell, if you could.
Yes, certainly. I think members will recall when we were awarded this money late last year, there was always going to be a challenge to get it spent by March. That's been recognised by the government. They've extended the timescale to June, as Councillor Edmonds just outlined. The MOU, which released the money to us, it provides plenty of flexibility in terms of the spend. The intention is very much from the government that this money is spent on improving properties and providing energy efficient solutions. For a multitude of reasons as set out in the report. So at the moment, we've got an oversubscribed scheme. We've got 118 applications in for that 1A section, which is only to deliver 15 measures. So we're confident we've got the numbers. There's some challenges, as everyone's had it, in terms of delivery during COVID times. So working with our partners at the moment, we're just trying to resolve some of those actual challenging issues of delivering the schemes, but we're entirely confident that we will. The second grant allocation will offer another 28 external wall installations and 12 air source heat pumps. That should be spent by September. So overall, I think, I wouldn't have any concerns about the money not being spent. The money's been rolled over to this year, and there's every intention for it to be spent. And the government, that's the intention of the government to ensure that we do that. So hopefully that adds some surety to some of the questions that may come up around that area. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Powell. Councillor Cheadle, did you have a question, or has it been answered?
Well, it's sort of been answered. Yes, I mean, my understanding is that the green scheme was extended simply because there weren't enough contractors to do the work, and there still aren't apparently. So we're just going to have to keep a jolly close eye on the expenditure of this grant. And I suppose my question is, if for any reason it isn't spent at the end of the period in which it's supposed to be spent, what happens to it?
Can I pick that up? So if I can, the MOU allows us to renegotiate with the Secretary of State to allocate the money in a different way, provided it is spent against the objectives of the grant scheme. So there's plenty of flexibility there. There's also an ability for us to negotiate with other partners to deliver it if the scheme that we've put forward is undeliverable for some reason. So, as I say, I think there's every confidence that we can spend the money in line with the objectives of the grant scheme.
Thanks, that's good news. Thanks very much.
Thank you. Any other questions, members? If not, Councillor Edmonds, could I ask you to move the recommendation?
Yes, certainly, Chair. I move the recommendation on page 157, which asks members to endorse the contents of the report.
Thank you. Thank you. Can I have a seconder, please?
I'm happy to second it.
Thank you, Councillor Cheadle. Members, any debate? Councillor Leach.
Yes, it's more of a statement, and it's to give my thanks to Mr. Sexton and the Environmental Health team for all the work they put into the greenhouse grant. It's, I mean, they did a very good job in applying for grants and getting. And just a general statement, the only problem with government, what I call short-term grants, they don't seem to fully understand that there's a supply line for materials, and also there's a shortage nationally of skilled craftspeople to actually carry this work out. So a little longer would be helpful, but my thanks to the team.
What do you need? Thank you, Councillor Leach. I was muted. Councillor Sellis.
Yes, thank you. I just support what Councillor Leach has just said, and I wonder if there's any merit in writing to government to explain what Councillor Leach just described, because, as I said before, we seem to be going through so many hurdles with everything, and with grant applications and what have you. So I don't know how members feel with that. I made a suggestion up at County Hall on a similar point, that there are grants available, but actually navigating the process to try and secure grant funding is in itself quite Herculean at times.
Thank you. I think that's a point that's well made, Councillor Sellis, and it's something I'm sure we will represent to anybody that we can about trying to make that process more simpler. Clearly, we've seen examples of that ourselves with grants of all types over the period of the COVID emergency, and we've done our level best, I think, to try and simplify application wherever we can. Councillor Pearce.
Thank you, Leader. I just wondered what's, and I know officers can't go into too much detail on this at the moment, but I'm just wondering what's happening with the Brook Street car park, because we've been on a light touch improvement to that car park for the last 12, 15 months. And I know that things have been held up probably because of the COVID situation, but we have to remember that that store is still trading. And, you know, residents, members of our community are still having to park in there, sometimes with big pools of water in the parking spots. So I'm just wondering what is, you know, whether there's any movement now fairly soon on getting the light touch upgrade done. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Pearce. I'm not sure of any movement, but it's on our radar, and it's in our we're drawing a bead on it. We'll certainly have a look at that and address that. I don't know whether Mr. Brooke has got any update or whether it's something we need to chase up, Chris.
Yeah, thanks, Leader. I think it's probably something that's been on, well, it has definitely been on pause, and there's a few other sort of issues circling there with that building, which are not in our hands to control and what Co-op want to do. So, yeah, happy to dust that back off, and I'll report back to you and Councillor Pearce.
Thank you.
Thank
That's much appreciated.
Members, any other debate on this topic? In which case, we'll move to a vote. As it's a capital budget, Mr. White will take a named vote again.
Thank you, Leader. Councillor Cheadle?
4.
Councillor Edmonds?
4.
Councillor Jory?
4.
Councillor Leach?
4.
Councillor Moody?
4.
Councillor Mott?
4.
Councillor Pearce?
4.
Councillor Samuel?
4.
Thank you. And Councillor Sellis?
4.
Thank you. That therefore, members, is unanimous for the recommendation. Thank you, members.
Thank you, Mr. White. If we can move to the next item on the agenda, item 12, Public Space Protection Order, dog controls. If I could ask Councillor Mott to introduce, please.
Thank you, Chair. This is being brought back through the Hub Committee following concerns raised at full council when this was brought forward there a short while ago. As members are aware, we are obligated to review the public space protection orders on a 3-yearly basis, and following the public consultation, this went back out to consultation following concerns from members, and also further consultations were undertaken with the National Park, National Trust and South West Water. As you can see from the report, there have been slight amendments and clarification added, so hopefully that addresses members' concerns going forward. I'm therefore proposing the recommendations and that we accept the new public space protection order as detailed and attached. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Mott. Any questions, members? Councillor Leach.
Yes, the only question is, along with these orders, are we actually going to carry out a good regime of education? I actually got educated at the last council meeting. Always knew the dog poo would, if dogs haven't worked, could cause a big health problems to humans. What I hadn't fully appreciated, the dogs that had been worked, what they leave behind can be extremely detrimental to cattle, sheep and ponies. So I think what we need to do is to do a proper comms educational push to try and make people not only pick it up, but take it and put it into any form of litigation. So are we doing that?
Thank you, Councillor Leach. I'd certainly like to see that. Councillor Mott, is there any plans or is that something we would have to develop?
No, Chair. We are on the verge of doing a general education linked in with waste as a whole, rather than focusing slowly on dog feces. I could give you chapter on first on the effects of leaving dog poo lying around and bags, etc., etc. I won't bore you all with that now. Do contact me though if you would like me to give you more information. However, because we don't as yet have an order in place and won't do so until the end of the month, subject to this going through full council, we can then focus attention a bit more on dogs and the problems with that. But we are ready to go with an education and a social media campaign to highlight the need of picking up and not leaving any litter where bins are filled, etc., etc.
Thank you. I'd certainly like to see something along the lines that Councillor Leach suggests. So that's something we can hopefully work on.
Indeed, Chair, but until we get an order in place, we are unable to do that.
I agree. Councillor Edmonds.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Well, look, I'm really reluctant to kind of raise the somewhat controversial area of the national park. So apologies to Councillor Mott, and we weren't able to speak this morning, unfortunately. So I really would just like to touch on it. I think it's better that I raise it now and rather than we get to council. It's really just to clarify my thinking. I've had further thoughts around the national park element of this order. So I just really want to clear that up in my mind. The thought occurred to me that probably the common areas that the park is probably covers not only West Devon, I would imagine Southampton, Team Bridge. I'm not sure. If that's the case, how would we know? How would a dog walker know on what part, of the moor, which council they fall under? Have the other councils got similar orders? Are they the same? Are they consistent? How would we know, what the law is, the expectation is in a particular area of the moor? I'm not even sure whether I would know whether I'm on the national park or not. So there's kind of that confusion in my mind. I don't know if that's really relevant. I'm very aware that the national park have got their own very clear message on this, and that is to ask dog walkers to pick up after your dog wherever you are in the national park. So that's quite clear. So I came to the conclusion, and I'm not sure this is even possible, but is there an option if we remove simply the words common lands from the exceptions in the order? So it would simply read, the exception would be the Dartmoor National Park.
Well, in answer to your first part of your question, I'm not sure where Team Bridge are on their public spaces order. I would have to look that up. South Hams have exactly the same order that was put before us at the last full council, and theirs has gone through and been accepted. Much easier than my proposal seems to be going through. The reason why the common land was added is because of members concerned at full council, and that was added in to give further clarity for the area that was covered. I do know that the National Park are in talks with Devon County, because they are in the process of reviewing all of their bylaws, and the common land being one such bylaw which they are looking to review. Now, which way that will go is open to debate at the moment. We won't know that until that review has taken place and they have consulted and voted on that.
Yeah, it's just that I think I read somewhere in all the sort of correspondence that's been generated during this process that we're probably not even going to patrol the common lands. So I kind of wonder why we're bothering with this if no one's going to monitor what's happening up there. So is there any point? And we simply rely on the Dartmoor National Park guidance, and we leave it to them to control this situation, rather than us perhaps causing some confusion, uncertainty. As I said, I'm not wishing to complicate this already elongated process. I just simply want to clear my thinking on that before I arrive at council, so that I can make a clear decision on the day.
Absolutely. Like I said, this was added in due to concerns from members who wanted further clarity on which areas were going to be covered. We do not have the manpower to patrol, to use your words, Councillor Edmonds. We will, however, use the order to be able to respond to concerns and inquiries raised by towns and parishes over areas which seem to have a problem. We can then go and send our localities officers out to those areas and monitor and do accordingly. As I've said many times before, this is just one piece in a larger jigsaw that will allow us to hopefully educate and make the leaving of dog feces as socially unacceptable as smoking, for example, not wearing seatbelts, just to give you two examples of which there was an initial outcry and is now generally accepted that this is how it needs to be for safety.
Thank you, Councillor Mott. Yes, thank you for that. That's been helpful. Thank you.
Thank you, councillors. I think one of the key things for me is that no one's saying that we're going to turn West Devon into a police state where everyone is being inspected for their dog bags or whatever, but this does give us the tools to address situations that might occur where action is needed, and I think we do need to have that ready and available to use. Councillor Ewing, do you have a question?
Yes, I do, for Councillor Mott, please. Within your education programme, will that be going into primary schools in particular? Younger children are always the best naggers for recycling, dog poop, etc. And my other comment is this really is a serious issue. I can quite often do a loop around Tavistock College along the canal, and it goes round by the college and back up again. I have been known on one occasion to pick up 32 different lots of dog poo and another walk to do 29 lots, which is absolutely disgraceful that I should be picking up, because I'm just a bit focused on removing it, because it's by a school and it's on a footpath. So I totally endorse that we want to pick it all up, but I do remember when I was much younger there was a campaign about the eye disease that dog feces can cause, and I cannot remember the name of it because I think it begins with M and I can't remember how you say it, so I do apologise, Councillor Mott, but thank you if you could answer that bit for me, please.
Yeah, certainly. I mean, as and when time and availability allows and we're allowed to go into schools, etc. Yes, that would be lovely to be able to go into schools as part of the wider message that we need to get out to the wider public that it is now socially unacceptable. That coupled with the doubling almost of dog owners now, certainly within the last sort of 12 months of the pandemic, where owning a dog seems to be a requirement of being at home now. That it does lead to problems. Now, like I say, it does mean that we have to educate the wider public in that it is socially unacceptable to leave dog poo in the first place. It's even worse to leave it wrapped up in a plastic bag, tied up on the side of the path for somebody else to have to dispose of. And it seems to be a general disconnect that we as a species seem to have with our wider environment, that it's somebody else's problem to clear away our waste. And we need to, as individuals, take full responsibility for what we produce and what we leave behind.
Thank you very much for that, Councillor Mott.
Thank you, councillors. Can I take a question from the floor? Councillor Crozier.
Thank you, Leader. First of all, I would like to congratulate the officers and Councillor Mott on the reintroduction of this report. It's much better written, more succinct, and says what it means. I was following up on Councillor Edmonds' comments, knowing what Dartmoor National Park is. What we contend to be Dartmoor National Park, there's a lot of land in between the boundary and the actual moor properly, and the ground which this pertains to is the area that is open to the freedom to roam under the Crow Act, which is the open ground beyond the field boundaries as you go up onto the high moor. And also within the high moor there are established very large new takes, and that applies to those as well. They are open land. I hope that helps in the debate on the Dartmoor situation. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Crozier. Councillor Moody.
Finally got there, Chair.
Well done.
Had the cursor on the other screen. Yes, I just wanted to comment and thank the officers and Councillor Mott for presenting this report. As far as I'd like to just extend on the point made by Councillor Leach about education and press releases, etc. To include the first thing that I did not know until this report was presented was that the stick and flick, which I always thought was the right thing to do rather than putting it in a plastic bag, was acceptable. Obviously it isn't, because the dog feces causes problems for animals. The second thing is that as part of the education process, could we include how people can dispose of bags of picked up dog poo? We were in a situation where a lot of people think that you can only put them into dog poo bins. However, we have been advising for some time now as a council that you can put dog poo in any bin. You can put it into a waste bin as well. So I hope that we include that into our education.
Certainly, Councillor Moody, we can do. The general advice currently is either to double bag and put into either your general black bag waste, or you can, of course, like you've already stated, put it into a dog bin or into a general waste bin for disposal. However, I would like to remind members and the public who care to listen that if the bins are full, that there will be a requirement for them to take that home with them to dispose of in their own waste.
Exactly. Thank you.
Thank you, councillors. Councillor Sellis.
Thank you. As a dog owner, I declare an interest and I walk my dog on the moor. I think this should be, all land in West Devon should be classed under this. I think everybody should pick up, no matter where they are, whether it's common land or whatever. So West Devon, I don't think it needs to be specific. All lands in West Devon. People buy dogs, people buy dog food, and dogs produce dog poo, and it's up to us to dispose of it safely. And I pick it up and I bring it home and I put it in the bin, or you know, so that you can get it for energy, energy from waste. The educational programme needs to highlight the health issues, etc. Everybody, the young people, and I agree with Councillor Ewings, yeah, get the kids, because they do nag at you, quite rightly. And the disease is as a result of roundworm, as I recalled. I think it's toxocariasis or something, probably misquoted the day. But it is serious and it's absolutely awful. So let's not be nitpicking about which bits of common land or that. Just say West Devon, because Dartmoor is in West Devon, a lot of it. Thank you.
Thank you. And Councillor Cheadle.
Thank you. I've got a question. First of all, my apologies. I'm struggling with the internet and can't download the latest papers on this. So this may be surplus to requirements, this question. Could Councillor Mott just clarify that the latest version of this paper applies to land under West Devon's control, and that does not include common land? Is my understanding of that right?
That's correct, because the common land that you referred to comes within the national park bylaws.
Right. So just to be absolutely clear, from an enforcement point of view, we can enforce this policy everywhere throughout West Devon, except if it's on common land.
Yes, because in that case, it would come under the national park recommendations, which, as we have already discussed, the national park recommendation is to pick up and take away.
But there is common land outside the national park.
Yes. Your assumption is correct, Councillor Cheadle.
Yeah, so there's common land in the national park and there's common land not in the national park.
Yeah.
And this order applies to land within West Devon, not in the park and not on common land.
If it's not within the park, my understanding would be, and hopefully Mrs. Foskett is here to help clarify for me, that it would, if it's not in the national park, it doesn't come under the national park bylaw. Therefore, it would be covered under the West Devon's PSPO.
But what about the common land in West Devon that isn't in the park?
Then it would come under the order.
It would. So it's all of West Devon, common land or not, except the land inside the national park.
Yes.
I think
You're
Mr.
sure about
Fairbairn. Mr. Fairbairn is wanting to get on and get some advice. I'm hoping it's on this point.
You hope correctly, Chairman.
Thank you.
Yeah, the power to make the order is in respect of public space or public area within the or public place within the council's area. So if it's within the council's area and it's defined within the definition of a public place, then it's an area which an order can be made in respect of. A public place is a place to which the public have a right of access or have a license to access. There are some restrictions on where we can place orders in respect of trunk roads and places like that. But by and large, open spaces within the district are capable of being the subject of an order. So Councillor Mott is quite correct to say that it's the order is applying to the open spaces with the exclusion of the areas which are outside of the which are within the Dartmoor National Park. That's what I understand the effect of the order to be.
Okay, so it's irrelevant whether it's common land or not.
Absolutely.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Fairbairn. Councillor Pearce.
Yeah, thank you, Leader. My question has been answered by Mr. Fairbairn, actually, because there are areas of common land which are outside the national park, and you know, my concern was that by taking the wording of common land out of the order, protection order, it'll cause some issues going forward. But thank you, Mr. Fairbairn, for clarifying the situation on that, because we've got to look at, you know, this order is to support our town and parish councils when they have persistent offenders. And therefore, you know, if we don't cover those areas of common land outside the national park, it's leaving wide open for a difficult situation for those towns and parishes who are in this situation. Thank you.
Very good point, Councillor. Thank you. Councillor Mott, I wonder if I could ask you to move the recommendations.
Thank you, Chair. I therefore move the recommendations as detailed on page 173 of your agendas and as shown on your screens.
Thank you. Could we have a seconder, please?
Happy to second, Leader.
Thank you, Councillor Pearce. I think Mr. White will take this one by exception. So if anybody would like to indicate if they're not prepared to...
Sorry, before we do, we are in opportunity for debate now. We've had the questions, so we're now in debate. Sorry, Leader.
I do apologise. I'm rushing ahead. Members, we've moved into debate. Councillor Edmonds.
Yeah, right, thank you, Chair, and really my thanks to Councillor Mott and the whole team. This has been quite a difficult report to negotiate and manoeuvre through the various processes. So I thank them for their patience and answering and dealing with all these issues. But for me, I'm now satisfied. I totally support the order. There's some very good comments being made, and I take all that on board. I obviously support it from my parish's point of view. I've always supported that. So I'm now in the right place to support the recommendations, and I'm sure I shall be consistent with that approach when we eventually get to council, when I hope that this will go through very easily. Hopefully we don't have to spend any more time on discussing this. But thanks again to all the team that have been extremely diligent and patient. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Edmonds. Councillor Pearce.
Thank you, Leader. I would just like to thank officers and Councillor Mott for bringing this forward. It's been a very difficult time for them, and you know, I found it quite strange how much debate has gone into this when we already have a public space order in place. It's a continuation for what we've done for probably the last 10, 12 years, and it is very important in being able to support our towns and parishes with a legal document should they have persistent offenders in their area. So I will certainly be supporting the recommendation, and also when we go forward to full council. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Pearce. I think that's some really important points there. Councillor Mott.
Thank you, Chair. I think just really thank you to Hanny Foskett for going through this report with me and for being so thorough with her report. And also, if members are particularly interested, there are a couple of very interesting videos regarding the real need of why we need to pick up and why we need to have this sort of thing in place on the New Forest Facebook page. I appreciate it's a New Forest, but it is also very relevant to our area as well if they require any further information or any more incentive to why we should have this in place.
Thank you, Councillor Mott. That's very helpful. Members, we're going to move to a vote. I'm proposing to do it by exception. So if anybody is not prepared to vote in favour of the recommendations, perhaps they would like to indicate now.
There's nobody typing there, Leader.
Yeah, I think we will take that as an approval of the recommendations. Thank you. If we could move to the next item on the agenda, please, Mr. White. So item 13A, these are recommendations arising from the O&S committee meeting held on the 2nd of March 2021, the consultation and engagement task and finish group. If I could ask Councillor Cheadle to introduce this recommendation.
Thank you, Leader. Yes, this piece of work came out of part of the recovery plan, where we had a number of sessions to consider what sort of consultation and engagement strategy we should adopt. And out of that, and very much thanks to officers and members of the working group, we've produced a document which members of the Hub hopefully have read. I draw their attention only to three bits of it, really. One is there's a sort of table in the middle of it, which shows the number of different ways you can consult and engage on an issue. And the proposal is to use that table as a guide so you can pick the most appropriate way of moving an issue forward. The second is there's an action plan in the paper, which details a number of things that we've got to do, pieces of the jigsaw we don't have in place yet, but will get in place relatively quickly. And the third thing, to my mind, one of the more important bits is that once adopted, this policy requires any author of a paper coming to council for endorsement to specify what sort of consultation and engagement they have chosen from the table I referred to earlier. So our hope and expectation is that once we're in the swing of this, the consultation engagement will be every bit as important as delivering whatever it is the paper proposes to deliver. So I thoroughly recommend it to the Hub Committee and hope they'll find the ability to endorse it.
Thank you, Councillor. Any questions, members? I've got no questions coming forward. Obviously, it's completely clear to everybody. So on that note, on that basis, Councillor Cheadle, if I could ask you to move the recommendation.
Certainly, I remove the recommendation as appears on the screen in front of you.
And could I have a seconder, please?
I'm happy to second that, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Mott. Members, is there any debate? I've got nothing coming forward. in which case I'm happy to take this again by exception, members. So if you are minded to do anything other than support the recommendation, perhaps you could indicate now. Nothing coming forward, Mr. White, so I think we can take that as an approval.
Thank you very much.
And we have another ONS item, I think. Item 13B, recommendations arising from the ONS committee meeting held on the 2nd of March 2021, localities, task and finish group. Could I ask Councillor Moody to introduce this item?
You certainly can, Chair. Thank you very much. I'd just like to say that the localities, task and finish group was set up in October 2020 to undertake a review of the locality service, and was chaired by Councillor Barry Ratcliffe, and the terms of reference are attached to the report today. But in the light of the current recovery plan post COVID, the Task and Finish group have sought to develop a clear role and function for the future of the locality service. The Task and Finish group have considered the current operating model and the individual roles within the locality team, and this report sets out the conclusion of the Task and Finish group and the recommendations which we agreed. The report was considered by overview and scrutiny on the 2nd of March and was unanimously supported. The localities service has not been reviewed since 2015. And initially, the mobile locality officer's responsibility was basically a snap and send, take a photograph, gather information and send it back to the office for further work, rather than resolving issues on the ground. And the role since then has developed into a much more customer focused and actively resolving issues at the first point of contact. But the service plays a very important role for the council in responding to COVID, and the locality officers were integral in the formation of the consumer cluster groups, with a role of including delivering of food parcels and supporting the most vulnerable in our community. However, the local and national landscape have changed since March, since COVID started, and the Task and Finish group reviewed the increased demand on localities, and we were looking at an anticipated future requirements. Since December 19, the extended management team restructure has been restructured, and the teams contained in the report are now responsible for the business manager responsible for case management, Mrs. Moody. The Task and Finish group met with the locality officers in October to review the community cluster response, and members determined that it was feasible to incorporate some of the positive elements of the response model into everyday working routines. The cluster model, according to feedback, was more successful in some areas than others. On the 3rd of November 2020, members considered a variety of duties that are currently carried out by the existing MLOs, as well as the responsibilities of the civil enforcement team. Whilst each of these duties are different, they seem to clearly overlap, and they are both the customer-facing aspects of the role. A potential is identified for closer links between the two teams, and finally at a meeting in January, the working group considered how these relationships would exist between all the teams, and we formalised to meet the current and future priorities of the council. The MLOs have been consulted and about the potential changes in the service, and have received and were very responsive and positive about the proposed new roles. It's worthwhile also highlighting that members also discussed the benefits and the fact that in South Hams, the locality teams changes have been accepted by the Southampton members. So the Task and Finish group agreed that the economics of scale would be realised by aligning the local services across both councils. So in conclusion, the Task and Finish group set out with clear recommendations which were delivered on corporate priorities and with the assistance and will assist elected members with their wards and help the council deliver more visible street presence to our communities. So the other thing I would like to just say is that if you have any questions regarding, with the permission of the chair, if I just read through the recommendations which indicate I will work with the business manager for case management, but the hub the hub committee recommends that the business manager for case management, in consultation with the portfolio holder, will 1. Carry out a review of the locality services structure in order to develop the following. Environmental protection officers are incorporated into the locality service, that close working relationships between localities, parking enforcement and waste teams are formalised, that shared officers are introduced to improve the flexibility to meet teams' demands, and drafts that we draft a new locality team structure to support recommendation 1, which will ensure clearly defined roles that support the delivery of scheduled tasks and the work of community groups, developing service level agreements where necessary, and also an improved officer base and field support for mobility officers. So that's quite a mouthful there. However, if there are any questions that members have, I think we have Mrs. Moody available to answer any questions if I can't answer them. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. A question coming from Councillor Cheadle.
Yeah, thank you very much. The original Task and Finish group's title was Locality and Clusters. There's no mention at all of clusters in this report. My understanding is it was sort of dismissed fairly early on, but perhaps we could have an update on whether clusters are dead and buried.
Could I ask Mrs. Moody, could you respond to that, please?
Yeah, good afternoon, members. Thank you very much for your question, Councillor Cheadle. Yeah, so in terms of the cluster working arrangements, they are very much dying down now in terms of the response as we move to the COVID rate recovery. I think what's important is that the Task and Finish group did consider whether cluster arrangements going forward would work and be successful and deliver on the needs of the authority. I think it was decided that by implementing an operational structure, we were able to flex if we were asked to respond again to COVID. And so by introducing some different roles and the clearly defined roles, we will be able to respond to any cluster arrangements in the future if required. But in terms of that day-to-day delivery, they weren't deemed necessary. I hope that helps, Councillor Cheadle.
Okay, thanks very much.
Thank you, Mr. Moody. Councillor Edmonds.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Well, look, T18 gave us many good things, and the formation of the locality service is certainly one of those good things. I've just one small point from the report, and I think it's page 212, section 2.1, where it talks about how the mobile locality officer role has evolved, which is good. My question is, I wouldn't expect a blow-by-blow account of all their activities within the ward, but perhaps where there is more significant involvement, then perhaps some feedback to the ward member may be helpful, and then we can be working as a team within the ward. I don't know if that's a point that perhaps could be considered, but obviously I'm not trying to create more work, more paper, simply that it might just help the ward member to fully understand what's happening in the ward and what's being done about it. And as I said, working together on some of these issues.
Thank you for that, Chris. I think that's a really valid point. And one thing that I think it's worthwhile pointing out is to ask members to engage with their locality officers as like we in Tavistock. I don't wish to be Tavistock centric, but we have some of the members in Tavistock have a good working relationship with the locality officers, and quite often locality officers they are the eyes and ears on the ground, and they probably know of things that are happening within the wards that ward members may need to know about. So I think it's about building that relationship with the locality officers. But as far as this report is concerned, it's about making the locality service flexible and being able to react to different changes. And as Mrs. Moody said, is to, if we do require to use the locality officers in a different way, they have the background and they've got the support so that they can do that. That's why we're looking at as part of the recommendation is to have introduce a good relationship between other officers, parking enforcement, waste teams, and environmental protection officers as well. So it gives a full, comprehensive support for the community and for the businesses.
Yeah, thank you. Chair, can I just make one more comment, if I may, Chair, in response?
You may, and then I think Mrs. Moody would like to comment on that point as well.
Okay, well, I'll just say that, yeah, thank you, Councillor Moody. Your point is absolutely correct. And I should just clarify, I do have a very good working relationship with my MLO. That's absolutely correct. But it's just unconscious that as the role evolves, and, I'm looking more to the future, that maybe as they take on more activities and have more contact within the ward, then, sometimes it's that extra bit of feedback perhaps would be helpful. Certainly, I do like to know what's happening on my patch, and I'm not suggesting there isn't feedback. I'm just saying that as this moves on, that maybe that's a point we may need to consider if we can perhaps encourage some feedback when it's felt appropriate. Thank you.
Thank you. Can I bring Mrs. Moody in?
Yeah, thank you very much. Councillor Edmonds, yes, it's an excellent point that in terms of the feedback to local ward members, and this was actually raised as part of the South Hams locality structure. So one of the things that's been recognised, in particular in the task and finish group, was the amount of administrative tasks that locality officers are required to carry out. So one of the things that we will be addressing as part of this restructure is ensuring there is adequate admin support so that the MLOs are actually able to go out into the community and be able to feed back any issues and be the eyes and ears, which is what they were always intended to be. So it's a really good point, Councillor Edmonds, and I can assure you as part of this restructure, we will ensure that that is addressed.
Thank you, Mrs. Moody.
Thank you. Councillor Sellis.
Thank you. Yeah, actually, Sarah's just touched on one of my questions. I'd like to know how the workforce is feeling about this, because looking at it, it sounds quite exciting for job development, and I would hope that being able to have a systematic approach and streamline and be able to multitask and balance everything like that. I want to be sure that our locality officers are happy with that, and the environmental officers, and that they look to this as an opportunity. because, and I would also like to add that I think that as a councillor, this has been one of the best things that we've ever had, is having locality officers. They have been absolutely superb and made my working life a lot easier. So you know, thanks. But I'm just concerned that they're happy with you know, the opportunities there.
Councillor
Sarah,
or Mrs. Mead?
I was just going to say, Sarah, would you like to just comment on the? I know that the officers, all the officers, have been have discussed this issue, and they're all very happy with it, and very supportive. Right across the board, they see it as a good move forward. Did you want to elaborate on that, Sarah?
Yeah, I can do. So I think that's one of the reasons that the 2.2 recommendations in there around that improved office-based and field support. I think officers on the ground have felt very isolated, in particular during the COVID pandemic, because obviously it's difficult to go out there and support them. But in future years, absolutely, they want that development and that growth. If we look at what we've done sort of in the South Hams of that development within the locality service, currently there is only the level 8 and there's nowhere else to go. We're looking at actively putting in that middle tier, so that element of responsibility, that autonomy to be able to resolve issues on the ground for our residents, and for officers to feel empowered to be able to resolve things. And we have worked quite closely with them throughout this and asked them what they felt would help improve their working environment. So a lot of these recommendations as well, whilst they've primarily come from the members in the task and finish group, the officers have had some input into this.
That's. May I have a supplementary, please, Leader?
Fire away. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah. You're saying about the administrative support and back office support. Is the IT facility okay? I think I hope I know the answer to this, but I just think it needs to be aired. If the IT equipment which officers out in the field use is up to scratch.
Yep, so our officers on the ground use what we call it all on mobile, so it's on an iPad device. So when they're doing any street monitoring, any waste monitoring, if they're reporting dog bins that are full, it's all on IOM, and it's an automated process that goes through. We're working closely with FCC at the back end to make that even. Sorry,
not use abbreviations, Sarah.
Sorry, Councillor Sellis. Yeah, so we're working with the waste contractors to make that process even more efficient, and we will be doing that in the future. But at the minute they're using all on mobile, which is a real simple form, and the officers have access to be able to report a number of issues on the ground, and we're hoping as part of this restructure that we can then broaden that out to our civil enforcement officers. So if they're on a car park and they see a fly tip, at the minute we would send that to a locality officer to go out to the same location to be able to report that fly tip. We don't think that's efficient. We think if the officer's there and it's a couple of minutes out of their time to fill out a form on all on mobile, we should be encouraging them to do so.
That's fantastic. Thank you so much, Sarah.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Yelland, are you there?
Yes, sorry, I didn't hear you, Chairman, because you cut out my end.
I'm sorry.
That's all right, the IT beauties. I just had a quick question, actually, if I may, on page 2 and 3, which is item 3.1, which is, again, just going back to the community cluster. I mean, if it's the intention to sort of wind down the community cluster response, those groups that have been meeting regularly, are there any plans to let people who have been invited to be part of that group know that they're being wound down? I know some town and parishes will have appointed representatives, so they will sort of need to be formally advised that those cluster groups are being wound down so that they can deal with that accordingly. And my next question was, then I assume that we will be reverting back to regular links meetings in the not too distant future, because obviously they've not been able to be held. Thank you.
Would you like me to take this, Leader?
Yes, please.
Yeah. So in terms of formally winding down the clusters, Councillor Yelland, I think they're just organically reducing in terms of frequency and input, and that's purely because they were set up as a response to COVID-19, and as we move to recovery, that's what's happening. But I think if I could hand this over to Steve, if possible, Leader, to give you a little bit more insight into that.
Of course.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Sarah. I mean, the link meetings is an interesting one because we've survived for 12 months without them, but I still feel that there's a sort of need for something. However, what I would say from my experience is that I think, from my perspective, they were sort of tended to be officer-led, when in actual fact, I think what the parishes were looking for in terms of the link meetings was a member-led discussion. And I think we need to revisit the terms of what the purpose of the link meetings is, and perhaps even consult with the towns and parishes as to what they would want from those meetings, because I feel it felt like it was officers giving them an update rather than them discussing issues they wanted to come together and discuss. And I think we need to revisit that whole thing, and maybe there's a consultation exercise that we need to do with the towns and parishes on that. I don't know what you think about that, Neil.
Well, I'd be very much in favour of that. I think we do need to make that relationship much more dynamic, and perhaps some consultation into what would help towns and parishes most would be really useful in my view.
Thanks.
Okay, Councillor Hipsey.
Thanks, Leader. First of all, I'd like to just congratulate the whole of the localities organisation, because I think they do an amazing job with a relatively small person power. I find the localities officers personally, as a member, extremely helpful. They're a great source of information about what's going on out there on the ground, the boots on the ground. And I did take the opportunity 2 years ago when I first joined the council to go out on and spend a day with one of the localities officers. And one of the things that just concerned me a little was, and I don't know, perhaps Mrs. Moody might have a comment to make on this, is the potential problems of lone working. And it did concern me a little that these guys are out there on their own, facing the public, and let's face it, these days it's always a concern when you're out on your own that either something might happen to you out in the Bundu, whether it's actually caused by a member of the public, or it might be a breakdown or a health issue or something like that. And also, I think we are unfortunately in a situation in our society now where very often when you're dealing with members of the public, you do need a witness as to what you're saying and what you're doing. And I suppose really I'm just looking for a reassurance that it is being considered, please.
Would you like to take this, Leader?
Yes, please, Sarah.
Yeah, thank you for your question, Councillor Hipsey. So we have a really robust lone working policy within the council, which all officers who are operational have sight of and input into whenever we review the policy. We have also a really robust sort of logging on, logging off system. So there's always somebody of an evening that is checking that the officers got back to their home address or at the end of their patch, and that they logged off safely, and they have to call in and say, yes, I'm home, etc. To add to that as well, because we know that signal can be problematic where we operate, we have just introduced trackers into the vehicles. So not only do we have the iPads in which we can identify someone's location, we can also use the vehicle trackers now as an extra level, if you like. So we're always going to be able to know where our officers are. They have an iPad and a phone, so we have 2 ways of being able to contact them. And of course, we do keep in regular contact as the day goes on, Councillor Hipsey. But it is something that we do take extremely seriously, and I can assure you we have a robust policy in place for that.
Thanks, Sarah. That's very reassuring. Thanks a lot.
Thank you. Councillor Cheadle.
Thanks, Leader. I was just going to come back and suggest to the question raised by Julie Yellen that if there are people that were enjoying the opportunity to be in a cluster group and the cluster group is sort of folding up, they do have an opportunity to join the monthly community Zoom chat where sort of similar issues are often discussed. So and many parish councils have taken that opportunity up.
Thank you, Councillor Cheadle. That's a really good point. Councillor Leach.
Thank you. Within the review, and just bear in mind the lone worker issues, which I've actually been concerned about for some time, actually. Within that review, will we be looking at some form of man-down system which can go with mobile phones, or would we be looking at some form of body cam which would give a bit more protection and also get evidence quicker?
Again, would you like me to come in, Leader, on this?
Yes, please.
Yeah, thank you for your question, Councillor Leach. In terms of the body cams, we've had a lot of chats with officers around this, and actually officers on the ground are not keen on body cams. Often they can be seen as very, what's the word I'm looking for?
Intrusive, maybe.
Yes, that's the word, Councillor Jerry, thank you. Yeah, and I think often what the image of the locality service is absolutely that friendly face, that the ambassador of the council, somebody you want to engage with, somebody you want to ensure that your issues are resolved on the ground. And by having a body cam, I think that might put a barrier in between that, because they're often associated with civil enforcement officers, for example, and that's a very different role. So again, it's ongoing, and we can always look to explore that in the future. But I do know that officers on the ground have some reluctance in wearing a body cam for all the reasons I've just described, Councillor Leach. I don't know if that helps.
Yes, it's the first bit. Do they have any form of man-down system? And it usually can come with mobile phones. So if they fall down, if they faint, if they have problems, that then sends an alert. Do we have anything like that for them?
We don't currently have anything like that, Councillor Leach, no. But that is again something we can look at and explore. I think when it comes to these devices and we have to look at sort of the risk associated with these things, and again, it'll be consultation with officers on the ground if they feel that that's something that they would like us to explore for them, Councillor Leach. But we don't currently have something, no, is the short answer.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Mott.
Thank you, Chair. It's just really to remind members that there is a very strong and comprehensive lone working policy that, as members, we have also recommended that we take a look at that and abide by that and update our diaries, etc., so that we can reflect on where we are and where we're going. Like I say, it is a requirement for us as members to look at as well, and hopefully that will reassure members over the strength of the policy for our staff.
Thank you, Councillor Mott. Really good point. Okay, there are no more.
Excuse me, Chair. Just before I do, I'd like to just say thank you to Councillor Mott for that reminder that we all need to be taking care when we're out and about, and to look at that policy is very important. I'd like to thank Sarah for all her responses today, but also if we go back to the our diary, that we have a date in our diary for the customer first. There will be a report coming back on the 27th of April regarding this proposal. I just thought I'd put that into perspective for you.
Thank you. Okay, I've got no more questions coming forward, so perhaps I could ask you, Councillor Moody, to move the recommendations for item 13B.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, yes, I'd like to, rather than reading them out all again, it's the recommendations. The Hub recommend that the business manager for case management in consultation with the portfolio holder, and then there's items 1, 1.1, 1.2, 1.3 on page 211, and part 2, 2.1, 2.2 on 212. Oh, that's a mouthful, isn't it? And I move those motions.
Thank you. Could I have a seconder, please?
Happy to second.
Thank you, Councillor Leach. Members, we're into debate. Councillor Cheadle, your hand is up. Is that for debate or is it a legacy hand?
That's an old hand.
Thank you. I've got no debate coming forward, either from members of the committee or from the floor, in which case we'll move to a vote, members, and I propose to take this by exception again. So if anyone is minded not to support the recommendations, perhaps they would indicate now. Mr. White, are you happy that that will be an approval?
More than happy, thank you, Leader. There's nobody typing in the box for those listening to the streaming, so we'll take that as a unanimous approval. Thank you, Leader.
Thank you. If we could move to the next item. The next item is an exempt item. Mr. White, would you like me to move part 2?
Yes, please, Leader.
I'd like to move part 2. Could I have a seconder, please?
I'll second that.
Thank you, Councillor Moody. Can I have confirmation that the stream has been cut?